Welcome back to Long Delay's Hobbies. It's been a while, and today we're going to be painting a guard of the Fountain Court. This is a resin version of the Games Workshop miniature. As you can tell by the nicely bent spear, I wasn't able to get a hold of the metal variant without paying an arm and a leg, so here we are. We're going to start with the easy color of this miniature, which is the Abaddon Black Air. That's going to be covering the vast majority of his cloak, as well as a little cloth in the front of his face, which actually covers most of his face. So you can kind of be a little bit messy here. I used black primer. Of course, you're free to use whatever color primer you like, but this is just going to, for me, it was fairly simple, just going over the black primer with a black air paint. So again, this is just going to cover most of the outside cloth of the model. For the metallic portions, I used Iron Hand Steel, which is a brighter colored steel color, and that's going to go over the helmet as well as his shoulder pauldrons and his chest plate. And don't forget as well, the tip of the spear is also going to be silver painted with Iron Hand Steel. He's also got a little bit of chainmail and some leg armor that's sticking out near the bottom of his legs. Now for the feathering on the outside of the helmet, I used Gray Seer. We're going to do some further work on this later, but this is what I use for a base. I also used Gray Seer for the white areas of the cloth of his inner coat. So there is a basically inside, other than lining, that is supposed to be light gray or white, depending on your perspective. So I used Gray Seer as a base here. Now, he does have a very small amount of flesh showing, basically just his eyes, so just use Cadian Flesh Tone to pick that out. Now, there are some gold bits on this model, mainly that little tree-shaped emblem on the front of his helmet, as well as a little bit on the chest plate. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be a tree or something else, but I used Retributor armor to paint that gold. The cross haft of the spear was also painted with gold. There's also some trim on the shoulder pauldrons that I just painted up with gold to make the model stand out a little bit. The model is mostly, of course, silver and black, so this gold trim really kind of helps to break up that monotony of just silver and black, because without the gold trim, he just starts to look like a regular Minas Tirith warrior, and which is not something you want. So for his gloves, I used Rhinox hide. I also used Rhinox hide on his boots. Very small amount of area on this model is going to be this light brown, this medium brown color. And the last area to be base coated is going to be the spear. I used a slightly different brown, dryad bark, which helps to differentiate the browns in his glove versus the browns in the spear. And with that, the model is base coated. So let's move on to our washes, starting with Nuln Oil. I used for the metal parts, I used a fairly heavy wash of Nuln Oil. I also used Nuln Oil on the Gray Seer areas in the helmet, but for those areas I thinned down the Nuln Oil so that it didn't just completely wash away the grays, because I only wanted the Nuln Oil to go into the recesses. So I used a let's say less paint on the brush whenever I was painting the gray feathers on the helmet. I went ahead and washed the black areas of the coat. Your mileage may vary when doing this, but I did want to kind of bring out the recesses in his black coat. Now for the brown areas, I used Agriculture Shade. That's going to be his helmet. His gloves, his spear haft, as well as the boots. There's not a ton of brown on this model, but to those areas that exist, use Agrex Earth Shade. There's even fewer areas where you'll be using Reikland Flesh Shade. I used it on the areas of his eyes, as well as the gold areas. So again, very few parts of the model where you would use this. Now we're ready for our highlights. The most important part of the model to highlight is the cloak, of course, which has tons of folds. Really takes well to highlighting, so I used Eshin Gray as my initial highlight. There's a ton of like little folds. You can kind of go nuts here with highlighting. There are folds on almost every side, left, right, in, out, front, back. There's even might be hard to see, but there are very small folds here underneath his left pauldron. Now to highlight up his gray feathers, I used some Ulthuan Gray air paint to kind of bring back up the white. I also used Ulthuan Gray as an additional layer paint over the gray sear that's on his coat. Just to brighten it up just a bit. And to highlight his gloves as well as his boots, I used some Gorthor Brown. So this is not a step that's going to take too long, but make sure you would want to have like a thin, pointy brush here to make sure you get those knuckles. And for my second highlight, just to do the top levels of these folds in the cloth, I use Mechanica Standard Gray. I'm not going over every single highlight that I did in the previous Eshin Gray step. I'm just picking out some of the higher points, as well as making sure I hit the black cloth as well, because that is the black cloth on the front of his face, because that is kind of a more focal point. And there are in fact folds in the sculpt on that black facial cloth. And I'm going to now use some Runefang Steel. This is a very, very bright silver color to highlight the metals, the metal tree that's on his chest plate, as well as the silvers on his pauldron. I'm going to do a little dry brush here on the chains, and just do a few high points on his gauntlets as well as the helmet. And with that, our Fountain Court Guardsman has been completed. We've done some additional basing work on him, put down some nice mud and leaves for him to go out into the city of Osgiliath, try to take that back from some orcs. But he is now ready to go. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.